Hey Boulder Flycasters, Nathan Cook here. Going to talk to you about steelhead fishing in California tonight. Apologies I couldn't be there. Work thing got in the way, unfortunately. So have to deal with that. But at least we can get a recording in and teach you a bit about steelhead fishing in my home state of California. And if you're going to be visiting, or if you're visiting the Bay Area or San Francisco, what are some good places to go, maybe for the day, or even a couple days, or if you want to plan a full-on steelhead trip with a guide and whatnot. Northern California has some of those legendary steelhead rivers and salmon rivers you hear about quite often, like the Klamath and the Trinity, which we'll be going over a bit as well a little bit later. But I have a few presentations for you here. First, we'll kind of go into the introduction to steelhead fishing. Maybe if you're not familiar with what a steelhead is, their life cycle, where you can find them, what type of regions in California have distinct species of steelhead, and then some kind of what to expect if you're coming out and doing some fishing for this trout species. A little background of me: I was a trout fishing guide in Yosemite with the Sierra Fly Fisher for quite a few years. I was also a fishing department manager for the Orvis store in San Jose. That no longer exists, unfortunately, but yeah, I wish it was. Had a lot of great stories from that store. It was an awesome one. Avid fly fisher in general. Traveled all around the Northern California, targeting steelhead and trout specifically, but also bass and a bunch of other fun niche species. And also taught many classes over the years, introduction to fly fishing classes, and then specific classes like targeting for steelhead in specific rivers in California. So some of what we're going to be talking about is, like I said, where are you going from San Francisco? Where are kind of some of the common steelhead rivers are from the Bay Area? And let's dive into it and show you where I'm talking about. So San Francisco, down here at the bottom of my screen, the San Francisco Bay Area. Home to a lot of stuff, historically steelhead, but not so much anymore. As is the case with steelhead on the West Coast. Climate change and loss of habitat and just general water troubles really has shrunken their habitat and their range that they exist in. You can find the occasional steelhead going up some urban creeks in the Bay Area, but that's probably about once a year. We'll talk about some of those popular ones. Tailwaters in the Central Valley around Sacramento. This is where you're going to find a lot of that good concentration of salmon and steelhead fishing close to the Bay Area. And like most steelhead fishing and salmon fishing in the West Coast, it's really supplemented by hatchery fish, which, don't get me wrong, are also catching a hatchery steelhead is really awesome too. So don't let that discourage you. If you want to target wild fish, they're certainly in there, but you're going to be catching more hatchery fish than wild steelhead. But regardless, they're still a ton of fun to catch. They're just amazing fish. So like I said, around Sacramento, going up kind of around the Chico, Yuba City, Oroville area in the Central Valley. And then as we move up north out of Redding and Mount Shasta, this is where we start getting these coastal mountains, the Redwood Empire and the Lost Coast, that a lot of those legendary steelhead rivers exist. To name a few, one, the Klamath, we'll go over Trinity, the Smith River up on the Oregon border, the Eel River, the Mad River, and a whole plethora of other rivers that exist in these really amazing coastal mountains. Really tough to get into a lot of times, so that's why we're going to focus on some of the more accessible rivers in the Klamath, the Trinity, and then our Central Valley rivers around Sacramento and north of there. So, diving in to our first overview is going to be our introduction to steelhead. And we'll go over a number of basics in this one. First off, what is a steelhead? Here's a photo of a really awesome steelhead my buddy caught. I believe that was in the Central Valley, but what I call a steelhead is a rainbow trout on steroids. They exhibit a lot of characteristics of a rainbow trout, except they live in the ocean for most of their life. They will hatch in their wherever home river they're in, migrate down to around the mouth of the river eventually, get used to the salt water and the brackish water down there, and then they'll move out into the ocean, spend a couple of years out there maturing, getting super awesome, and then coming back for their spawn. The cool thing with steelhead compared to salmon, a salmon will only go up and spawn once and then die. A steelhead can do this spawn run multiple times in their lifetime. Sometimes it's only one time, sometimes it's multiple times, but that's kind of the cool thing about steelhead. They can always come back and spawn and then head back out. So here's a just kind of a little overview. What we do here first is our in the river, in a freshwater habitat where they hatch from eggs. Then they will eventually grow up, move downstream, and then out to the ocean, and then return. So our first step is the alvin. So this is the life stage of a steelhead, where they hatch and they have their little embryo, their egg sac attached to them that gives them nutrients. So they'll live in this state for a season or so, and then they'll turn into a fry, where we start looking a lot, getting close to that rainbow trout look with the little par marks and stuff. Pretty small, only a couple inches long at this stage. Once they grow up, they'll move on downstream and start to get used to that saltwater environment. So this is where we get our smolt life cycle, our smolt stage. A little bit bigger, you start getting a little more silvery look of the steelhead. That's classic silvery lateral line with the dark or the bluish, dark bluish colored head that they get their name from, the steelhead. And then as they move out and then live in the ocean for a few more years, they start getting bigger, and then they turn into their adult stage, and then they'll come back and start their spawn. So here's a beautiful view of a pretty fresh steelhead that just entered the river probably not too long ago. You get a little more of that pink, but still quite silvery. And we'll go into just a little bit more of the morphology here pretty soon on what a steelhead looks like and how they kind of change. So we have a couple different types of steelhead. One is generally called the summer run. Those are your more what we call our half pounders, kind of the steelhead that are almost to that adult stage, but maybe still live in the estuary or in the river a bit longer. Getting a little bit bigger, kind of around that larger trout size. The one on the left, a good summer run that was caught in the heat of summer, which is really cool. And then the winter run, which is more of your famous steelhead runs. where you have your much larger fish that are entering from the river to do their spawn upstream. So kind of comparison there, your hand versus a spay rod. Also notice again the different color, the very bright silver of the winter run that are fresh in from the ocean. So just kind of going around, like I said, May through October is kind of your general summer run of steelhead. Lots of fun to catch on a 5-weight. You don't need some really big, chunky steelhead flies to fish these. Just a ton of fun, and you can fish them with your trout gear. And the other nice thing is the weather is generally quite nice. Winter doesn't really come around in California until, Northern California until early November, and then certainly in the Central Valley, you can have quite a long summer, even extending to the end of November. We have quite favorable weather. Winter run steelhead. This is what we're really talking about for steelhead is kind of that November through April time frame where you get the large ocean run fish coming in to do their spawn. They can range anywhere from, kind of that 15-inch range even and up to 30 plus inches, depending on the river. And they just fight incredible. When you hook into a winter run steelhead, it's a whole other experience. I mean, that's why you spend all your time out there freezing and in inclement weather to get that one winter run steelhead. It really makes it all worth it. So our historical steelhead range around the Pacific Ocean, from Russia, Kamchatka, Alaska, down Canada, and then down the west coast of the U.S. What a lot of the you think most of your steelhead is kind of that very Northern California, Oregon, Washington. Historically, they went all the way down into Baja. That's not necessarily the case anymore, but with some river restoration, like the Elwha River in Oregon or Washington, for example, on the Olympic Peninsula, could really show what removing dams and restoring steelhead habitat will do to trout populations or steelhead populations. It's really quite a turnaround in quite quickly. But yeah, quite a range that they used to have. As we focus back into California, we do have a number of distinct steelhead populations. The ones we'll be talking about here are the ones in green around the Bay Area, kind of in the middle of your screen. The purple, just inland of that's your Central Valley, the northern Central Valley. You have your orange and your teal colors up on the north. Those are your Northern California, your coastal run steelhead that do get a lot of attention for steelhead angling in the state. A couple other populations. One, the yellow, is your Central Coast one. Pretty limited populations, unfortunately, these days, much like the green section. And then also the pink section down kind of in the Santa Barbara, Ventura, LA areas, but we won't worry too much about that for this presentation. So steelhead are tricky because they are often on the move. What we're trying to find is spots in the river that they are moving up and resting before they start moving again. That's what makes them very tricky, because they'll be in one place and then move on to another place. So if we can identify those holding spots, we'll have a little bit better chances of catching one of these really tricky fish. First one is going to be a moderate speed current. I say about as fast as a brisk walk. They're traveling a long way oftentimes, and they need to go up and find places to rest and not fight really strong current for too long. And I mean, a long way, like 50, 100, 200 miles of river that they're swimming up. And current speed's a big part of this. So really nice, kind of a brisk walk. Riffles are a great spot, like this photo walking, my buddy walking through here. Channels, you're going to find these slots where they'll, about 3 to 6 feet deep, that they'll also hold in down the bottom. Keeps them safe from predators, at least from the sky, but also gives them a good spot to rest as well. So finding those slots and those nice runs. Tailouts is another really great spot where slower water is just downstream of fast moving water. So the fish are going to rest in tailouts and then move, or rest in those slower moving waters just below tailouts, and then start working their way up through that faster current. Deep holes, deep eddies, these big boulders in the river, woody, really nice steelhead habitat to, again, good resting, keeps them protected from predators in the shadows, under logs, nice deep, slow moving pools, another great spot. And like I mentioned briefly, riffles are another really nice place for fish to be moving through and not expend a lot of effort to get through there. And the surface chop also really hides them well, really camouflages them against the river bottom and the rocks and all the water chop. So definitely fish riffles when you're fishing steelhead. It's just great holding water for steelhead. And then there's a tint that we say is steelhead green. So steelhead green is just kind of that slightly off tint, off color water. Nothing too mucky or brown or blown out, but nothing too clear. Just this really nice kind of green, emeraldy, dark emeraldy forest green color is a great color for steelhead to be really comfortable in, be able to see the fly, and then be camouflaged against predators. Okay, so equipment. With California, you don't have to go too crazy with your steelhead gear. My personal recommendation, a 10-foot 7-weight rod is a perfect California steelhead rod. It's going to allow you to nymph really well. You're going to be able to swing flies really well if you're fishing streamers. You're going to be able to manage your line longer distances because it's just a lot of high stick nymphing most of the time. So you don't have to go too crazy, and the rivers aren't really that big. I think when most people think steelhead, they think of these huge rivers in the Pacific Northwest that you need to have just these ginormous spey rods, and granted for good reasons, but the environment for California steelhead rivers is much different. It's much troutier is what I kind of consider it. If you want to be a little more adventurous, I kind of like a 10-foot 6-weight to put a little more bend into the rod. If you have an 8-weight, if you have a 9-foot 8-weight, that's going to be just fine. A 10-foot 8-weight, even better. Maybe a little stiff if you need to fish thinner tippet, but not often the case where you have to do that. But you should be good. Definitely a 7 or an 8-weight generally are pretty good. If you have two-handed rods, those work really well too. Switch rods are really nice, 11 and 12-foot switch rods. That'll allow you, to access more water. Sometimes rivers are much wider in spots, obviously, than some other spots. So having that versatility to fish two-handed or one-handed is really nice with a switch rod. Or if you want to go, bust out the full 13, 14, 15-foot spey rod, go for it. We have the river for you. We'll go over some of those. But a lot of times that'll be a bit much for a lot of steelhead rivers. So that's why I kind of like the 10-foot single-handed rods a lot. Reels. Reels are going to be really important because steelhead, if you really get into a good steelhead, you're going to want a really nice smooth drag. You work often way too hard to catch a steelhead. You don't want to lose it because your reel isn't up to the task. So a nice quality reel, one preferably with like a sealed drag, will help if you're fishing in the winter against ice and just gunk and stuff. So reels often take a beating with steelhead. For trout, I don't often say that, but steelhead is definitely one of those things. Get a good reel, and then lines. Usually, a floating line is going to be just fine. If you have a nymphing specific line that has a bit longer belly, those are going to be really nice to be able to mend. So sometimes you'll have these specific salmon steelhead lines or nymphing lines, but generally floating line is going to be fine. If you want to use a sink tip for some situations, go for it. Or a full sinking line, I don't see too often a use case for them, at least in my time with steelhead fishing in California. But there's a time and a place. But fishing floating lines are going to be just fine for you. If you do need a sink tip, I don't usually recommend getting just like a dedicated sink tip line unless you're actually going to be using it more often. I really like these what are called poly leaders. They're just a tapered leader that are weighted. So you just tie it on the end of or it's a loop to the end of your fly line that sinks in different densities. And basically then you have a sink tip. And you'll be able to change them out very quickly and easily rather than switching out your whole line and then popping on your sink tip or popping on your floating line. You just have your poly leader and you change it up that way. Fluorocarbon leaders I do recommend. Fluorocarbon leaders and tippet. Oftentimes it's kind of that 1x to 3x range. And I do recommend getting used to tying the barrel knot or the blood knot. It just makes it much more resistant to getting pulled apart by a strong steelhead. Fluorocarbon, because you're going to be fishing subsurface, is more abrasion resistant, and you want to make sure your leader and tippet are up to the task if you hook into a fish. And then with flies, California steelhead are often pretty trouty, I say. So a lot of times a trout nymph does the trick. It usually be between a 6 and a 12. Couple I like here, something really rubber leggy, like Jimmy legs or Pat's rubber leg, or Prince nymph. This one I really like. It's called the fly formerly known as Prince. Common ones are also Psycho Princes, Flashback Hare's Ears, and Copper Johns, often in red, are very popular for steelhead fishing in California. And then streamers would be a good thing to have as well in your quiver of flies, usually around size 2 to 8. An egg-sucking leech is a very common one. The crystal bugger on the top photo there. The freight train is this other purple fly, a very popular historic steelhead fly. Anything with a lot of movement and some nice flash to it, and some nice flow, like hare's ear streamers do great. Fly presentations, basically dead drift nymphing, and if you want to swing flies basically across current, that's also a great way to do it too. So with steelhead, it's really mixing up your presentations and making sure you're fishing every spot thoroughly. But don't spend too much time fishing one spot if you're not getting hit. So you'll often what you'll do is drift your flies or swing your flies downstream, take a step, fish, take a step, fish, take a step, fish, take a step, and then come back up to the top of that run that you were fishing and repeat. So it's all about being very efficient, not spending a lot of time on any one spot, but also being leaving no stone unturned and changing up your presentations. Like this here, be systematic is a big thing with steelhead fishing. Really cover the water. Here's an example of swinging flies that will allow you to where you're casting upstream at about 45 degrees, and then swinging that fly at an angle compared to dead drifting single feeding lines. Both are great ways to fish for these fish, but mix it up. Be prepared for the weather. So breathable waders are very important certainly in the warmer months and the early fall for steelhead, so you're not getting too hot and sweaty, but also in the dead of winter where you could be having single degree days. Having breathable waders is going to get rid of that heat, so you're not it's not collecting in your waders, making you colder. We don't want you colder because it can get really cold out there. Couple different options. Boot foot and stocking foot waders are out there. Boot foot waders are nice because you get a bit more room in there. They are much more clunky. So if you're just kind of hopping out of the car, jumping in, fish, hop in the car, drive down to another spot, boot foot waders are generally fine. But they're going to be pretty clunky. Stocking foot waders are going to be much more comfortable with another boot that you know is a separate boot from the wader. You'll be able to hike much more efficiently and much more comfortably, and you can use it more often year round for your trout fishing. So I personally go with stocking foot myself. Just some quick clothing options. Cotton's kind of a killer because again it absorbs your sweat. We want something that wicks moisture away, so a nice merino wool base layer. Think thin layers, close to the skin for base layers, so it wicks that moisture away. A second layer, a nice fleece, cotton weave. Again, kind of keep it thin, just multiple thin layers. Third layer, what I like to do when it starts getting really cold is a lightweight fleece, put on a vest, and then have my top layer either my puffer jacket or a rain jacket if needed. Socks obviously are going to be important. Keep your feet and hands nice and dry and warm, but sometimes scotch is the way you have to do it. So keep a flask in your back pocket because sometimes that helps out on a really cold day. All right, so some additional resources. I like this book by Lanny Waller. Steelheader's Way has some really good tips in it. And then Dynamic Nymphing by George Daniel has some really nice, appropriate steelhead nymphing techniques in there. All right. So let's move on. Let's talk a bit about some rivers now. We've kind of gone through the basics. And now let's talk about one area that I've spent a lot of time in is the Central Valley. So Central Valley steelhead, specifically the lower Feather, Yuba, and American rivers, these are going to be just outside of Sacramento. So the American River, really cool, goes right through the heart of Sacramento, out of Folsom Lake. And meets up with the lower Sacramento, the large river that drains Northern California. Then a bit further up north, we have the Yuba City, the Yuba River, the lower Yuba. And then just north of that, around Oroville, we have the lower Feather River. So lower river characteristics. This from San Francisco. These rivers can often be gotten to um, within about a hour and a half for the American, and then about 2 to 2.5 for the Yuba and the Feather rivers. So these are great for one-day steelhead trips. Being in the Central Valley, you can often have mild temperatures. It can certainly be chilly and foggy and damp, but you're not getting the really same freezes and snowy and icy conditions you may be getting up in Northern California. But you also have a lot of really good easy accesses. And then these are much larger rivers. These are some of our bigger steelhead and salmon rivers in California. So these are really cool for either wading or they fish particularly well in if you're fishing with a drift boat, so you can cover much more area. And then just so much variation in how the rivers are. So nymphing and swinging flies, you get a lot of different techniques you can throw out there. Kind of already going over lines. Here's a couple other flies we have. A silver Hilton is a popular one, intruder. Here's your egg-sucking leech, rubber leg stoneflies. All right, so we'll start on the Lower Feather River. This is a really cool river with generally a very good steelhead and salmon run that will go up to Oroville Dam. So Oroville, the town of Oroville is generally where you're going to access it. There's a couple different areas. One is the low flow section. And then one is the high flow section. Generally, you're going to fish the low flow section if you're targeting steelhead. The high flow section is often more for the salmon angler, and it gets pretty crowded out there really for that. But the low flow section is really where we're going to go. Here's kind of a close-up satellite view of the area I usually fish the Feather, which is the wildlife recreation area. This is just a wildlife refuge. You can go out there, public access. There is hunting, I believe, and then the Feather River goes through it for some really good steelhead fishing. Here's a video of some salmon that were moving upstream through a ripple. It's just so cool watching these fish. Just come by your legs, and I mean they're just huge. So sometimes when you are fishing steelhead, you do hook into some salmon, and a lot of times by the time the salmon get up to this point, they're pretty zombied. They are doing their spawn, and they're pretty disgusting, so I don't recommend fishing them, but they are pretty cool to just observe. Also a common sight in the wildlife refuge during the winter are salmon eggs. So make sure you're watching out for those. Don't step on those. Very important. But here's a good photo of what the refuge looks like. Just a ton of really nice riffle water, and then upstream of my buddy here, you have these kind of nice wide open flat areas that you can go out there and really fish a lot of the river for the fish that are hanging out in these slower moving areas, and then also those riffles that we're looking at. Zooming in a little closer, this is what we call the hatchery run on the Lower Feather. So the Feather River Fish Hatchery, the steelhead are moving back up to this. You're going to be basically fishing downstream of this Table Mountain Boulevard Bridge. Above stream, you're not allowed to, but downstream, you just have a ton of fish that can often be in there. Pretty ridiculous. Be be ready for some crowds for sure. But it's a cool opportunity to hook into some fish. Not going to get into all these, but be aware that there are a lot of steelhead regulations in California and the West Coast in general. So before you go out to any of these rivers, make sure you're checking the regulations for steelhead fishing and what you're allowed to do out there. Also, they're not sections aren't going to be open all year. Some sections will, but some sections will be specific days of the year. All right, moving on. A little bit south of the Feather, we have the Yuba River. This river, really a great river, both for really year-round fishing. Really cool if you can see in this video, in this photo, all that kind of gray and brown area that looks like it's washed out. Those are all just huge gravel pits. It's amazing that this river is so healthy for having been dredged for gold mining for so long. It's really quite spectacular that this river is hanging on how it is, and it's just a cool piece of water. But that's what all that is. It's a lot of just gravel tailings along the river. A lot of river rock. So this is out of Marysville and Yuba City, up Highway 20. The common place to fish this is Englebright Dam at the kind of the right side of this photo where the red line starts, down to Hammond Grove. Hammond Grove is a state park. So if you're doing a drift trip, you're often doing it either from the bridge, the Highway 20 bridge, or up a little bit further. That goes through some private land. If the guide has access, they'll take boats through there as well. These fish are gonna just pound for pound just fight so well. Such a cool fish. These steelhead are going to be there, so there's no hatchery on the Yuba River. So if steelhead go up this river, it's by mistake. They think it's the Feather River, but they wind up up in the Yuba and spawning and are here for us to catch, and it's just so cool. The type of fish in there. So this river can be quite wide in places. So this is a really nice river for, you may break out the switch rod or your two-handed rod in some places. Or if you know the river, there are some really nice gravel bars that you can wade out on and fish these nice deep holes and slots that we were talking about earlier. That's a lot of the name of the game on the Yuba, is finding these deep holes and slots and fishing those and dredging those flies deep and wading out to them. But like all these lower rivers, fishing from a drift boat is optimal, but wading is really fun. So a little closer view of this. So here's that Highway 20 bridge, the Parks Bar Bridge that we talk about. So access, you can either access from the left side of this photo is our west side, or the eastern side, and go back under the bridge. And here's a little bit better view of those like gravel bars and tailings off the road. So that road is called New Truck Road colloquially, because by the end of it, you'll probably need a new truck. It looks like a missile testing site out there, but that's, take it slow, you'll be fine. I've seen passenger cars go out there, and it's pretty amazing when I do, really. But this will be the road that you access a lot of the river on, finding good parking spots, using Google Maps and Google Earth to pick out some really nice spots. Over on the far left, looking at those deeper blue sections, those are some those slots and runs that we're talking about that steelhead like to hold in on. As we go up, kind of where that Brooks Creek label is, just above that is a nice riffle that you see through there. Again, take mental notes of these characteristics on these rivers with Google Earth or Google Maps, and plan your attack that way. and moving on down, some more views of the river down New Truck Road. A lot of people will do the Hammond Grove riffle. This is a pretty easy spot to get to. The park, you have a nice parking area. Park there, you just wait out. There's a great, just a bunch of great riffles and slots all along that area. And if the river's low enough, you can wade across it. I would recommend definitely a wading staff doing so. But most of the time in the winter, if it's pretty low flows, you'll be able to get across it. All right, so moving on a little bit further south, in Sacramento, one of my favorites, just because the area is just so cool, is the American River. The American's a really great river all year round for shad fishing, striped bass fishing, salmon, steelhead, obviously, that we're talking about. But this is a river that comes out of Folsom Dam and Nimbus Dam. It has a fish hatchery up at the base of Nimbus Dam, so you'll get a really nice run of salmon and steelhead coming back up this river. Great river to wade, great river to fish, a lot like the Lower Feather, where you have a lot of variation in river characteristics, riffles and deep runs, being able to wade, being able to drift places. But what's really cool is once you're in the river, you really have no idea that you're in the middle of Sacramento. So here's kind of a little more close up. Fair Oaks, Art and Rancho Cordova as we move through. But here's a view of the river. Like, it's just spectacular that this river is in the middle of California state capital. Great riffles, great runs through here. You'll come across, some houses on the river, but the whole river has a riverway, like a parkway along the whole thing. So you're accessing all these spots along the river that just have all very different characteristics to it. It really varies it up a lot. So video here, doing some switch casting. Great river to bust out the two-handed rods, because it is quite a wide river in a lot of places. Here's a great photo of a really nice steelhead. And if you notice the fly on this, we're not talking like really big steelhead flies that you may be thinking or maybe used to. That's just a little beadhead nymph. So as these fish move out of the ocean, the further away they go, the more they start getting a little more trouty, what I call. They're start acting a bit more like rainbow trout. They start looking a lot more like rainbow trout with their colors, and start paying a little more attention to the aquatic fauna in that section of water. As you get closer to the ocean, these fish are much more used to chasing, eating saltwater species. So they're much more inclined to chase down very chunky, large steelhead flies. You'll get into fish with the large steelhead flies much further upriver, but you may want to focus more on nymphing in these much higher sections of rivers than you are if you are fishing closer to the ocean. From Sacramento to the ocean, these fish will go in through the delta, the San Francisco Bay Delta, make their way up into the Sacramento River and eventually into the American River. And I'm just going off the top of my head, that's probably about 100 miles of, at least 100 miles of river. So these fish have been in the river quite a long time by the time they get to this point. So they're going to look much troutier than your very dime silver, fresh ocean steelhead. But here's kind of a good example of that. So this fish, the steelhead, One, this is a hatchery fish, so right above her right hand, where she's holding the tail, is the adipose fin. Now, if this was a wild fish, that fin would be there. This is a hatchery fish, so in the hatchery they snip the adipose fin off so they can be identified when they get into the hatchery area for census and steelhead returns. Again, just a gorgeous fish still. No lack in fight for hatchery fish. But if we look at this fish, that really nice pink lateral line, that stripe line, that more spotted and green back on it, looks a lot more like a rainbow trout than a very silver steelhead that we think of. So again, use Google Maps to your advantage on these rivers because they can tell you a lot about the river and what sections, what to expect in certain sections. This one, the hatchery and Sailor Bar, is a really popular one. This is where a lot of boats will, drift boats will start their day, is Sailor Bar. So you'll identify the parking lots. There's a ton of them along all of this area. If you get to a parking spot and see that there's way too many cars there, move on to the next one. Or with steelhead, there may be a lot of fish in there, which is why everyone's parked in that spot rather than the other spots, because again, fish move often constantly. Upper Sunrise, you'll see. Lower Sunrise, Sunrise is the road. Sunrise Boulevard, I believe it is off the top of my head. The Sunrise area, these are big recreational areas. So these sections, you actually get even further away from houses and feel even more secluded on the river when you're down in there. But you'll see these on the river, like these big bars and big sand and gravel bars, great places to access fish and cast from and access the river. Another one of my really fun spots is Arden Ponds. These are ponds that were previously used as a quarry. So if you see all these little ponds in there, those are all kind of quarry pits that they dug out. Again, this was all very much gold mining area, what we call the mother lode, or downstream of the mother lode, really. But yeah, just another example of a really cool spot. And if you notice, the river does narrow up quite a bit in this section. So if you look upstream of it, the river's much wider. Nice for those two-handed rods. As you get down in this section, those two-handed rods begin to get a bit too much. That's where those single-handed rods really come in handy. Grist Mill, another one. It's kind of funny. You go through these spots and you're weaving through neighborhoods, and then all of a sudden you're on the river, and you had no idea, and it's just like, holy cow, where did this river come from? And where did the houses go? It's really quite something. Watt Avenue, another big spot. But again, if you're going out there, here's your American river regulations. Make sure you know when you're going out there and when to fish, or where to fish. So that sums up our Central Valley steelhead rivers, the Lower Feather, Yuba, and American rivers. Like I said, these are really your most accessible rivers to the Bay Area and San Francisco. Awesome place to go for a day of fishing. So let's move up north. So let's talk about the Klamath. The Klamath River is a major salmon and steelhead artery for the West. And what's really exciting out here is the four lower dams are going to be deconstructed and coming out, which is going to open a tremendous amount of steelhead habitat. So really looking forward to seeing what the Klamath turns into once those dams come out. So I forget the names of the dams specifically, but this photo is below Iron Gate Dam. It's just into the California side of the Oregon-California border. And then the 3 dams above Iron Gate on the Oregon side are coming out as well. So really, really thrilled about that and seeing what this river turns into. But the Klamath River, huge legendary river, really famous one for their half pounders, what they call, again, kind of those juvenile steelhead that will go downstream, get used to kind of the salt water, and then come back upstream. Not spawn, but they may do that a few times until they move out into the ocean. So here's an example of one of those half pounders. Now these things are a blast on a 6-weight rod. We use 6-weight rods on these in the Klamath, mainly so you can fish really heavy flies and get down deep. Not so much now. These fish really do fight quite well, but a 5-weight will fight them fine. But you're going to have a hard time fishing a 5-weight with the types of nymph rigs that we're going to be throwing on this river, because it can be very deep and it's a large river. So here's a half pounder, really nice half pounder. It's one of those wild fish. Again, the adipose fin on its back, just in front of the tail, is still there. Again, that rainbow trout coloration, really cool. But these things fight just bananas, and there are often a lot of them. Now here's another one. This one's more of an adult steelhead, a little bit smaller. You may be thinking that, oh, where are all these huge, gigantic steelhead? Well, California, unfortunately, you don't have too many of those really huge steelhead, those 30+ inch steelhead you'll see in Oregon and Washington places, but they're there. But here's a common adult steelhead. Notice the coloration, very bright silver. So this fish it's moved upstream quite a ways to this Iron Gate area, to where it meets the ocean. So if you're catching fish this dime bright up this high in the river, that fish moved quite quickly through that section. So really cool, the variations you can come across. Again, this section, great drift boat section. This section below Iron Gate Dam is going to be, you're going to want to fish in a drift boat ideally. Riverside access is pretty tough in that spot. So if we look up on this map, here's a map of the flow of the Klamath, basically on the California side. It goes up much further through Oregon, where it eventually meets the Snake or the Columbia. I believe it's the Columbia. To remember that. So out of Hornbrook is where that the Iron Gate Dam is. So as we move a bit further downstream, roadside access to it becomes a bit easier. So what we'll see on these rivers, these coastal mountain rivers, the highways will be much closer. They'll tend to follow the river more closely. You do have certain, definitely spots in these big canyons that you won't be able to get into from the road, but there's a lot of roadside access on these coastal rivers, because these mountains are quite zigzaggy and pretty rugged, and they're quite rural. So when you're fishing out here, on the map, it doesn't look too bad. So you say you get up to the town of Wairika. That takes from San Francisco about 6 hours. And then you start going into those coastal mountains. Now, it doesn't look that far, but suddenly between Wairika and the town of Happy Camp, it really is a long drive, and a long, slow, zigzaggy drive out there. So, one thing I will say since we're on this slide is fishing these coastal rivers, it's going to take you a lot longer to get to than you think. So if you really want a good coastal steelhead, like a unique coastal steelhead experience, you're going to have to deal with a lot of driving once you hit these mountains. Specifically, the Smith River is a very common one up out of Crescent City over on the coast. Just a gorgeous river. If you want to target those big steelhead, that is probably the place in California, the Smith River. It takes a long time to get out there though, so be aware these coastal mountains really extend your travel time a lot once you get off I-5. So the common section to fish the Klamath is out of Wairika along Highway 96 between I-5 and Happy Camp. Great roadside access. You do have a number of tributaries going in, like the Scott River is a really cool tributary. And all these tributaries definitely have shots at steelhead because fish will break off from the Klamath and spawn up these little tributaries. Now, again, check your regulations because you may not be able to fish those tributaries, but sometimes you can, and sometimes that's a way to get away from a lot of the everyday steelhead anglers and get a little more seclusion. But Happy Camp to Wairika along Highway 96 is quite common because there's a lot of good roadside access. So this is so about 150 miles below Iron Gate Dam to the coast. Really cool, wading access downstream along Highway 96, like I said, and then drift boat access upstream of I-5 to Iron Gate Dam for at least as long as it exists. Once the dams come down, we'll see. It'll be exciting. So here's a cool photo of it. Just a classic steelhead coastal river. Here's a shot of the mouth of the Klamath. Just again, classic river going through the redwoods. Just an amazing, unique experience going out and fishing these coastal rivers. And one thing to note: so steelhead rivers will often end up. Well, they will end up in the ocean one way or another. So the Central Valley rivers will end up in the ocean via San Francisco Bay. Everything north of that will end up in the ocean one way or another via larger rivers like the Eel or the Mad, the Matolia, the Mattole, or the Klamath, like this one, the Russian River, another good one. But they all exhibit kind of the same characteristics. So you're going to have often a beach and then a sandbar. So during the summer, when you have lower flows going through the river, that sandbar kind of gets built back up by the ocean currents. And then the river won't necessarily, it may kind of peek through the beach or the sandbar. But not really enough for fish to be moving back and forth. So this estuary over on the left side, that's where kind of your juvenile fish are going to be hanging out, getting used to life in saltwater. And then once the winter, the high flows kick open that sandbar and exposes the river mouth to the ocean. Now these fish can interchange. Now you have those juveniles moving out to the ocean to to mature and spend their adult life out there. Then you'll have mature fish coming back into the estuary, getting used to salt or fresh water again, and then moving up and spawning, and then turning around and going back out to the ocean. So this is a great view, very characteristic of just about all steelhead river mouths in Northern California. Another classic thing is the fog and the fog and the redwoods and the pine trees, just so cool. Beautiful area. All right. So our last river we'll go over for this is the Trinity, and you can't talk about fishing Northern California without talking about fishing the Trinity River. One of my favorites. This is, I believe this was taken in early November, maybe October. Just again, you're not dealing with super cold temperatures. You're having some really nice days, but chilly nights, and hopefully catching steelhead. You're not in the dead of winter, as you could be sometimes. Well, actually, now that I think about it, this is actually probably late September. Now that I think about it, so really cool on the Trinity. Another really nice fish, bright dime chrome, like a mirror. So here is the lower Trinity River. So the Trinity River will eventually end up in the town of Wichipec, into the Klamath River. So it's a tributary of the Klamath River. Comes out of Lewiston Reservoir down kind of bottom right, just out of Redding by about 45 minutes or so. So really accessible river, which is why, one, it's so popular. The accessibility of it is quite good, but also has really nice steelhead runs in a gorgeous area. So when we're fishing the lower Trinity, we're often fishing Douglas City, excuse me, the town of Lewiston and Weaverville. We kind of see that lower, almost middle part of the screen. You can certainly keep going, following the river along Highway 299, fishing turnouts and various day use areas, all the way up to Wichipec. Again, like I said, the time it takes to go between Lewiston to Wichipec is quite long, and even out to Eureka. Off the top of my head, it's probably on the measure of almost 3 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, just from there. So quite remote, but accessibility is quite good. So from, this is from San Jose, about 6 hours. From San Francisco, call it about 5 hours. And then, like I said, most commonly fished Lewiston, Douglas City, Weaverville, and then your optimal flows are going to be, fairly low, kind of that 1,000 to 500 CFS. You'll want to fish it. It doesn't necessarily get too much of those summer run fish, but certainly October through March, you'll want to be fishing those winter run fish. And make sure you're bringing warm stuff because it gets very cold on the Trinity. Water data, check water flows before when you go out there, just to see what you expect. But here's a great view of the Trinity. A really cool, intimate river. You would think it's a trout stream, and it is, but it's definitely more known as a steelhead fishery. So fishing just like you would a trout stream. These fish are quite far away from the ocean, so fish them like trout. You'll also have these much wider sections, these wider riffles in some parts. So be prepared for the long casts or the short trout casts. Either way, but another beautiful steelhead there, looking a lot like a rainbow trout. Equipment basics we've kind of gone over. Nothing we haven't gone over yet. A 10-foot 7-weight is my recommendation out there. If you only have a 9-foot 8-weight, that'll be just fine. Floating lines, your 1 through 3X leaders and tippets, and then an assortment of bigger nymphs is often the ticket out here. You can fish streamers as well, but often nymphing is kind of the way to do it. And we've already kind of gone through, make sure you're prepared for cold and rain and snow, but be positive. With steelhead, it's a very tricky fish. It takes a lot of patience. So be positive. If you're if you haven't touched a fish in 4 days of fishing, don't worry about it. That's just kind of how it is. But just go out there, have a good time, and if you do hook into that fish, suddenly all that cold and time on the river and will be quickly forgotten. So, an amazing memory to have. But anyway, thank you. That wraps up my presentation on California steelhead. If you have any questions on other rivers, feel free to email me or text me. I will write down my contact here. Nathan Cook. Go ahead and either contact me either one of these ways, and I'll be happy to help out. Well, again, happy steelhead fishing. Hope to see you out there, and we'll see you at the next meeting. Thanks, guys. Have a good one.